Let's do that.
Are y'all good with the mic and off? I'll take a silence as we're good with it.
All right, cool. Let me get this out of the way. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully midterms are not killing everyone and y'all all made it here, so at least you made it through. Today we are gonna be making this beautiful fake Hoya Airlines website. Basically just learning how to use CSS. I have some slides to start, but basically we're going to recap HTML, and then we're going to get into learning a little bit about CSS with a quick demo, and then we will just make this Hoya Airlines website, and that should be all that we're doing today. So I'll get started with the slides. Basically, I'll just quickly recap since it's been a couple of weeks. So HTML, JavaScript and CSS are like the three types of files that go into a website. We can refer to them as anything. We can call them website files, web page files, whatever it is. HTML, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, is essentially just what puts stuff on the page. It's like your button, it's your div, which is like a container for things. It's your paragraph text, your headers, your images, whatever it may be. It's the physical thing that's on the website. CSS we'll learn today kind of makes it look good, and then JavaScript will be your functionality. And we're gonna go from just taking the components of this Hoya Airlines thing to actually making it look good. Quick recap on HTML again. We have opening and closing tags for all of our HTML elements. We can add IDs and classes, and then for stuff like an A tag, you'd have like an href to denote your link. How we doing? As we can see here, you can add an ID and a class. You can also add a style, but we're going to be doing that with CSS, so it's okay. And you can also nest stuff. Very commonly, we'll make I'll just draw it on the side, but you will use divs to represent like logical containers. An entire page for your website might be a div. And if you have maybe a logo that's comprised of text and an image, so let's say your logo is a circle and then like some text, we'd call that a div, or we'd group it inside of a div. So as we can see here on the board, essentially our container, or we're calling it a top card, has a header and paragraph text inside of it. And what's nice is anything that happens to the outer div happens to everything inside of it. So we just logically group things in divs. I don't know why it's like div, I guess is divider. These are all of the common HTML tags for almost everything. You're essentially just going to have how it looks, and then you'll close it with the slash, which is a closing tag. And basically, as I demonstrated a little bit, when we design websites and actually build websites, the way you make things is you think about all of the elements on your page in a container sense. So there's some, like, these are some scenarios in which you would use a div. As I showed here, essentially you would sometimes use it to contain like child elements or things that are all grouped together. Sometimes you would use it to, if you also have something like on the other side, you use it to group other elements of your website in a different space than one group. What else? If you want to like align a bunch of stuff, maybe like you want to have some text that is at the bottom of your website. So if you want to align it at a certain part of the page, so you can see here it's centered horizontally, but our text is all the way at the bottom of this fictional website. So if we want to like group a bunch of elements anywhere and put it somewhere on the page, we put it inside of a div and move that div. And then we can also use it to like apply different styles. So like if you want like a drop shadow or a different like background color to make something pop, then you would also use another div in that case. And we'll get some practice. But I'm curious, what do you guys think deserves a div in this page? There might be something that's like very obvious. And if y'all don't want to say it, I can just go to the next slide. But basically, all of our elements, so the picture of the plane, the header that says Hoya Airlines, the book your neck, the paragraph text that says, or the subheader, the drop down and the button, everything it's all centered horizontally and vertically, which means it kind of deserves to be in a div or a container of its own. And it also, because we have the drop down and the button side by side, we're going to put a container around those so that we can make it side by side and it's not just like stacked on top of each other. There's one more div I didn't mention. Does anybody have a guess? And I kind of hinted to it with that picture over there. The page itself is a div. The way that CSS and HTML work is kind of everything is nested within itself. And as we saw when we wrote HTML the other day, the like outer div is kind of the body tag, and then people will typically put a div inside of it that represents a page. But you essentially just have stuff nested inside of stuff, nested inside of stuff, which eventually makes your website. Oh, okay. I just cheated, but how about we try and like make some divs out of this page? Does anybody have any guesses at what kind of deserves like a logical container? Let's start here.
I assume the white box that has all that stuff in it.
Yeah, that's great. As you guys can see, there's kind of like a drop shadow. Actually, this projector might be garbage, but okay, cool. There's a drop shadow and like you can see a rounded border. So that's like a styled and it's also got like a background. So everything inside of this is in a div. Let's go in the back. What else?
The seat selection.
Yeah, that's great. So this is on the right side of the page and it's also not touching anything here. So basically, the way we think about it is we have like a rectangle encompassing all the seat selection. And then we also have this like tile here or this card here that has the seat available. And there's one more, or we could call it two. I think it's just one. Does anybody have the last one? Yeah.
It's not that.
Exactly, yeah. We're like we'd make it two. The plane and the Hoya Airlines could be one, and then the DCA to Phoenix is also something that we could div. I think in this we basically just have everything here in three big rectangles. This is kind of so while we talk about it like there's the divs here. What we can get like way more granular because everything's nested and all of the elements kind of get a div. When you make a website like this, you can get like when you're actually making it, you get way deeper. So to go back to the plain page, each column is kind of spaced a little more than the other one. So these both actually get a div. These two boxes are side by side, so they would get a div so that we can get them side by side and not stacked on top of each other. Any container with text in it is technically going to get a div because there's no like rectangle tag. It's just a div with a background. What else? So like this guy, all of the text fields that get a label also have one. So we can get way more granular, but essentially this is just how we want to start thinking about any website. So for example, what's a good website we can pick apart right now? OpenAI has been getting some nice press. So we can start just picking apart OpenAI's website. In the middle here, there's a div. For example, this pill is a rectangle div, or it's just a div with text inside of it. And all of this text that is centered both vertically and horizontally is also going to be in a div. The side panel, so that we can actually put everything on the left, is a div with a bunch of links. And then the logo with like this weird sidebar thing in the top left, that's also going to be a div. But this is kind of just how we start to pick apart things when we think about designing a website. Okay, cool. So CSS, we've talked about it a little bit. It stands for cascading style sheets, which nobody remembers because it's not really important. But essentially, CSS allows us to like target our HTML and style it. So for example, this is just HTML. So we have like images of planes and headers and smaller like paragraph text and like a logo, and this like semicircle and some other shit. And when we add CSS, we actually get something that looks like a website that we're familiar to and that we could actually use and understand. Um, let's see. That's kind of all the stuff I said. So the way that CSS is written is essentially where HTML is just a bunch of tags inside of the body of an HTML or a .html file. In a .css file, we essentially just write a bunch of these selector statements in which we pick an HTML tag and then we open and close curly brackets and we just add we call them attributes. So like HTML, there's just a bunch of keywords to memorize. So color is one, background color is another one. There's like the size of your text, the font, and then there's also ones that pertain to if you have a div, like where in the page it will be. Yeah. So what you can do is you can essentially, if you want to target something, like in this case, we're selecting everything that is an H1 tag in our HTML file to make it both white and have a black background color. We can also choose to change things that have certain classes. So if we add the class header to a bunch of our like HTML tags and then we make everything with a header, like if we were to say header for this and then we'd make it white and then have a background of black, everything with that class would be changed. And then if you also had an ID, that's a way of like pinpointing certain tags. So like we could have one header with an ID of like 3, and then all the other headers wouldn't change, except the one with the ID that we target. But we will basically see. So if you're targeting just all H1s in a file, you would just use H1 as your selector. If you're targeting a class, you're going to use a period before writing the name of the class. So in like a HTML statement where you're declaring, like you're adding a class to something, you'd use quotation marks. You don't use that because we're just making it a string, so you don't need it. In CSS, you would just do a period before to let whatever's parsing your thing know that you are selecting a class. And then if you use a hashtag, that will select the ID. I'm gonna post these slides, but these are the only three things you kind of need to memorize with CSS. If you're just looking at tags, you write it as is, classes or a period, and then IDs or hashtags. You can also like select multiple things. All you have to do is just separate by a space. So I can make like this anything with a container class or an H1 tag. Oh, wait a second. This is target any H1 inside of an element with the class container. Oh. The combined, so if you do two, I don't think it's or, I think it's and. So if you have anything with a container and then also an H1, and it's also ordered. So if you were to do H1 and then container, it would be all H1s with a container. And that doesn't really make sense because you can't put a container instead of a header. But essentially the combined selector is kind of like a this and then that, and then apply all of it. So like all this means is like you can get very granular with what you select. Yeah, this is true. This is kind of just like HTML. Like HTML is basically, where is it? Once you memorize all of these, you kind of know HTML. With CSS, there's basically just like a bunch more to memorize. Because everything that you're writing looks like this. It's just a selector, open and close, and then a bunch of your attributes. So CSS is kind of just like memorizing attributes. And if we all got Copilot, I think that's going to make it a lot easier. The next thing to understand is Flexbox or like display flex. It's kind of how you'll be familiar with it. Essentially, like all you saw on the board so far was like you can like color something or make the background different. But what I was talking about earlier is how you can like use CSS to like move things on a page. That's what Flex does, or Flexbox. And that's kind of like the only way that we like make websites and like put stuff in different places on a website. So yeah, it's very important to know Flex. Like there's different ways to like move things logically on a page, but Flex is kind of all you need to know to get everything done. These are similar to just like the color colon white. These are just attributes and values. So essentially display flex kind of like enables the movement. It's like a formality, you just throw it on there. And that once you have display flex, then you can use any one of these. There's flex direction, which is essentially, or I'll just run through all of these. So flex direction is kind of like if you want all of this stuff instead of a container to go in rows or in columns. Justify content is, I think, horizontally spacing things. You know, if you center, that'll say like okay, it's gonna try to put an even amount of space on both sides and then have the thing that has justified content. Align items is gonna be your vertical. So if you have like align items end, it would look like this box on this page where it's all the way down vertically. Start would be up, centers, in the middle. I don't, no one really uses stretch. Space between would kind of be like what's up here. For justify content, it's gonna try to like put an even amount of space in between the two things. That you have inside of it. But we'll see a demo in a second. I really like, let's see. Flex. There's a good website for this. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, this is a good website for it. I'm gonna throw a couple things in our Slack just so you guys can see. Let's see. There's that, and then there's something called Flexbox Froggy, which is like a good way to practice. Um, okay, cool. So Flexbox Froggy is essentially saying like it's a way to practice just like moving things on the page. Um there's like 24 levels, but you would kind of just write, I think this one it wants you to use justify content. Um so I'll kind of walk through what's happening here. Logically, we have the pond, which is like a big div, and we have two elements inside of the pond. Um, no, we don't. We're trying to move the frog to the lily pad and all of these. But this is just saying we want to move the frog to the lily pad by like we'd use the justify content because that moves things inside of the pond to the right. Um, let me see if there's a better example. So in this case, we would you do justify content center. Because what's gonna happen is we're taking our elements, which are our frogs, and we're gonna put them horizontally in the center of the page. Maybe. Let's see. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Yeah. This is gonna be, we're gonna use justify content again, which is how we move our elements horizontally, and there's something called space between. Which might have a dash inside of it, but this basically, oh no. What other ones do we even have? Space around. But as you can see, like no one really knows what some of these do, but like if you play with enough of them, like you should eventually get an orientation that you enjoy. And this is kind of just like how you make a website or how you style it. Uh, if you guys want, you can play with these and take a look just at like how you'd uh work with Flexbox to design something. I am going to pull up a quick demo. Um, so what I'll do is if anybody wants to follow along, I'm going to give you guys the index.html. So I'm going to give you the HTML. And then I'm just going to style this with like some Flexbox stuff. And that is just like gonna be a quick demo, and then we'll go into the Hoya Airlines. I'll drop it in the Slack as well. We're just blowing up the Slack today. But if you want to follow along, just in VS Code in any folder, you would I right finger click or two finger click, and I make a new file. Oh, I just made a folder. You'd make a new file, and you'd call it index or anything. You can call it like flexbox.html, and then you hit enter. And inside of it, you'd hit the exclamation mark and then tab, and that kind of sets up an HTML. But you also can just copy and paste what I had, because that should include all of the like meta stuff that goes around. So let's see what we have here. Open live server. So we're gonna make something like this, which is just a bunch of containers or rectangles, or what they actually will be are divs. And we're gonna like add some borders to some of them, so they have this black border. We're gonna remove borders from some. We're gonna add background colors and kind of just like change them up a little bit. So I'm going to rename this. Okay, cool. So we can see in our HTML file, I'll zoom in. Is this big enough? Can we all see this? Did I drop it in the Slack? Let's see. I think it's in the F25 bootcamp. Yeah. I'll give you a second. So if we take a look at our HTML file, we'll just remind ourselves, essentially every HTML file has a head, which we all know like the title part where we have like the title of the tab of the website. So if you can see where my cursor is in the top on your HTML, in the HTML head, the title is going to be reflecting what is the name. So in this case, the title is Flex Demo, so the tab name is Flex Demo. If we want to add CSS, all we have to do in the head is add a link. You kind of have to memorize this. The rel just says what the type of link is. So CSS, we call them style sheets because they have styles. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. So CSS just, it is style sheets, which denote like styles for the HTML. And then href, just like our A tags, we just add an href and we say, like sometimes this can be a link to, let's say like if there's a website that has this, but for our purposes, we're just gonna add the path. So if you hit Control or maybe on Mac Command and then space, you'll see what files are available to you in your current folder, or we call it a directory. So in this case, I'm in a folder named Flex Demo. So if I want to link something with href, inside of Flex Demo, I have three choices. if I want to, let's say, take something from another folder like Hoya Airlines, I could do dot dot slash, and now I can see I can pick any of these folders. And again, to bring up this like autocomplete, it's control space. And you can choose anything, but in this case, what I want is my index.css. Cool. So what this is saying is we have our HTML, but when it's like making the website, it's also going to take the index.css file and it's going to combine them. And then your browser, in this case, Chrome for me, is going to display stuff. So we have in this example a bunch of divs with just text inside of them. Everything in this example is a div. And what we can see is we have a bunch of classes. So I'll start with the outer div. Everything in this example belongs to the outer div. One way that VS Code makes it easy to see is you like indent it. So let's say, how would I show that? Okay. We'll get into it later, but basically when you're basically picking like the structure that you're making your file. So in this case, we have like a div that contains everything. You indent every nested element like one tab. So everything inside of outer is going to be like indented a little bit, and then everything inside of this like nested div is indented. And this helps us think about like, okay, everything that's inside of this outer div. So the inner red, the inner blue, or first, second, third, fourth, all of the things on our page right now, because this div has everything, is going to receive the styling of outer. So if we want to target outer, let's see, background, we'll do some flex. We'll make sure everything's in a row, justify contents. Okay, so let's go back here. Outer is a class. So if we go back to our CSS, to target a class, we would write dot outer, and we open and close curly brackets, which lets us put our attributes inside. And then my Copilot wants to go crazy and just copy everything already, but I'll type this one out and then we'll go a little quicker next. So we're gonna start with a background color for the page, and we can say CSS like has keywords, so you can do like you can type the color white. Let me go back. Sorry, guys. Okay, hopefully it's still recording. There's white. There's also you can do hex codes. So hex codes for colors, we can just look at them. Is anybody not familiar with hex codes? Can you raise your hand? It's completely okay. But basically if we all kind of know hex codes, you can go to like any color picker ever and just like drag a mouse around to get a hex code. And they represent colors nicely. And if you grab a hex, you can do a like hashtag and then do the hex code, and that will also be a valid color. And we'll quick look at the syntax. You end every attribute line with a colon, and between the attribute and the value, you add a colon. I think I said colon twice. Semicolon is at the end, and colon is in between the attribute and the value. what else? Um. Very good observation. Yeah, there's like a ton of ways to select colors, so you can also like do the color picker here. Um, and what's cool about that is it also lets you like change the saturation, or that might be the opacity. I'm not very good with design. Um, I'm gonna go for a white though, just so it's like a clean background. Uh, the next thing we want to do is, because this is the outer container or something that's going to have a bunch of things that we want to like put on the right or the left or the center or whatever in the screen, we're going to enable display flex. So we're going to type display and then flex. And then as we saw in the demo, basically all of the squares were like in a row going like across the page. That is happening because everything's has a flex direction of row. If we did column, everything would just be stacked on top of each other. And the final thing we'll do is we'll add a justify content. So just like the, excuse me, Flexbox Froggy thing, like we're just gonna add I think it was maybe center or space between. I'm gonna do space between for now. Um, Let me check actually. Oh, flex end. Oh no, center. Um, okay. So for the justify content, we can do center, and then for line items, we can do flex end. Flex end just means it'll be at the bottom of the container that it's in. Um, so let's take a look at what this just did. So does everybody here have VS Code and live server? I remember one class we did live server. Can you raise your hand if you don't have live server? Sick. For both of you that don't have it, do you have VS Code? Sick. So on the left side, there's like a building block tab. That's gonna be your extensions. So click on the extensions and then type in live server, and it's gonna look like this like sideways Wi-Fi symbol. And you're gonna click, I think it's just install. So once again, the extensions, oh, let me just go back. So extensions on the left, which is like the building blocks. You're gonna type in live space server. It's like a pink one. That's 70 million downloads, which means like usually the higher the downloads, the more trustworthy an extension is. You're gonna install it, and then it should just work. The way that we use live server is we always start on an HTML file, and you will two finger or right click on the HTML file, and then you'll click open with live server. I'll show that again. So I'm gonna close mine. But basically, to use the live server, which just shows you what your HTML and CSS look like, we will click, we'll do like a right click or a two finger click, and we'll do open with live server, which should be one of the bottom options. And once you do that, it should launch Chrome, or launch a tab in Chrome, which will show you all of your stuff. So what do we see right now? We can see, I mean, this is kind of a mess, but like what's different? And I'll demonstrate that now by just removing, I'm going to comment out the CSS. So without CSS, this is what our page looks like. Just everything gets listed out and it's all on the top left because that's like by default where everything goes, all of our divs. With CSS, just the outer, just adding Flexbox, what's happened is we've taken everything that was in the top left and it's been moved to the center. And I don't know, the page was white before, so that didn't really change anything. Something that's cool that we can use is if you right finger click and choose inspect. I click F12 on my laptop to open the inspect page. So I'll demonstrate one more time. If you right finger click and click inspect, you'll see that we can kind of see our HTML. It's just kind of like public, which is cool. We can just like see it all. So we can see we have like this outer div class on the right. Like this is exactly what we just wrote. Or exactly what you guys copied over and put in your HTML file. If you guys look over here in the top left of this page where my cursor is, if you click on that, it lets you like interact with the website and see what everything is. So this is kind of where we start to understand like what the fuck we just made. So the outer div is this purple box. So when we made it like display flex, like when I say container, what it is it's like a bunch of space with things inside of it. You can see there's like a faint purple line, kind of like chopping everything that's inside of it. The first, the second, the third, the fourth, and then the nested are all divs. So we can see there's what, 5 divs inside of the outer div. Websites are kind of just a bunch of rectangles. So what we can see here is there's an outer rectangle and 5 inner rectangles. And once we play with the nested divs, we'll see that we'll like split that nested one into like sub divs. You're gonna hear me say div a lot, sorry. But what's cool is we can also like and I'll once again show what I'm doing. When you don't have this, you can't really see it. But on the right, if we click on this thing with like an arrow, we can like inspect and like see like the div outer is like the outside rectangle, and then we have a bunch of inner divs. So we see here div inner red, div inner blue. Whatever they are, we can like hover over things and see what they are. Awesome. Let's add some more to our index. What's the next thing that we should add? We've done outer. So let's take a look at we can see here in our HTML file in our classes, some of these have like 2 words. Kind of like the combined selector where you could write like dot container and then space h1 before. With classes and not IDs, but with classes for CSS, you can kind of add any number of classes so that something can be styled by like any number of selectors. So everything with inner is a part of the inner class, but we can also add another class. So like this one's inner and red, this one's inner and blue, inner and green. They're all going to be targeted when we style the inner class. Like if I style inner and the red class, that'll only hit the inner red one. So let's do inner now. So if we go back to our CSS and we target inner, what do I want to do? Margin and border. Okay. We can add a margin so that we can space out everything in the inner. And there's different ways to there's different like units of space on a website. So like if I were to ask you like if I were to ask any of you guys right now, how long do you think this is? We could say like we can't really just say inches because it's gonna like show up on people's laptops, and those are like different sizes, and like it might be a phone, so like that's also not gonna be the same. If we really want to be exact and kind of like use inches, we could specify some number of pixels. Or what's that? So we can say this width, let's say, is like 768 pixels. And pixels, whenever we use them, are going to be px. What are the other ones? It's like, let's see, units for CSS. Height, like pixels. There's, let's see. Okay, so there are pixels, there's rem or rem, which is like relative units that I think are dependent on the like size of the font. Um you can also do a percent. Um as much as possible, it's nice to do relative things. So like pixels are exact, like a pixel is a pixel. But you can also do things like rem and percent, which are kind of like you pick a grounding and it's like a ratio almost. The percent you guys know. Um, so here, what we can do is we can do a margin of 10 pixels. And when we save this, we'll see that it gets added. And you can see now there's like a little space between each one of our divs. If we take it, if we take another look, you can see there's still the same containers, but now there's like a margin in between things. We could also make the margin like 5%. So you can see like this is just a percentage of the available width available to it. Nice. The other style we want to add to the inner is border. Borders are kind of annoying because there's like 4 things that you smack into a border. You first specify the thickness and then the type of the line the border is, and then the color. Let's make a super thick border. We'll do 3 pixels. We can do a dashed line and then we'll make it like green to be fun. So now when we go in here, like we can very clearly see like the divs, and then everything outside of it is like margin that we've added. If we want to prove this, we can now remove the margin, and we can see now there's no margin and it's like very squished together and it's touching itself. Or each div is touching each other. So I always add like a margin between things. It kind of just looks nicer when you're making a website. Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and just quickly toss all of this in the Slack so that if you guys are following along, you can have like the beginning. So we'll just add the colors because I want to go into the nested one now. Um, let's see. So I'm gonna quickly just add what I put in the Slack. So we'll have outer, inner, and then red, blue, green, and yellow. So all those classes will now be styled, and we'll see this is kind of the progress we're at. Nice. So first, second, third, fourth div, and then we have a div that has the nested and the double nested stuff. Let us add, let's target the nested class. So when we look at our index, there's this div that has the inner 2 green, so the nested one, and then there's also a div inside of that, which gets confusing. We'll just write it out and then we'll take a look at what happened. Something to note as well is we added padding. Padding and margin are kind of similar, but the difference is padding extends the div and margin extends the space between divs and other things. So if we take like a page or we'll call it a div, and we have two divs inside of it. Let's say they're right next to each other because we have no margin yet. If we increase the padding, what would happen here is the divs would get longer. Let's say there's like a little bit of text inside of each one. So the padding would basically go, okay. Around the text, we're gonna increase the space to the edge of the container. So that's what padding does, it adds space inside of the div. And margin, if we were to add margin now, would add space outside of the divs. So what you can see when we added our padding before is the green dashed lines like no longer touch the text. Like if we remove that, so let me go to like here and I'll just like kill the padding for some of these for green and yellow. You can see now like the div is the size of the text, which is like annoying and that's not typically how we do it. So let's go back. And we'll do nested. So you can specify the width of a container. So like one way we can do it is by adding padding. What we can also do is we can just flat out say what width we want. I again like to do everything in like relative percentages and stuff, just so that like it'll work on your laptop and mine. Even if they're like different size screens and pixels. Uh, we can also add some padding. Padding is something that can be a little more like you write it exact, but you can see what just changed is, oh, let me click here. What just changed is now our div is huge because we added some width to it and it's like, I don't know, a lot bigger than the rest of the divs that we have. We'll add a few more, like let's just change the background color so we can, like we already have the dashed, but we can see if we change the background color and just make it, I don't know, like purple. I spelled that wrong. And we go back and look at it again, our div is huge and we can throw a background color on it. What else do we want to do? And then, yeah, we'll do, so what you can see is you can do a display flex inside of something that's already displayed flex. All that's doing is saying like everything on the page is displayed in a flex way, but we can also say, even if something itself is like an element that is being controlled by flex, we can make it so that the stuff inside of that element now is also controlling things with flex. Just the way to think about it is like everything is nested always. And if you need to move something around, flex is like a pretty good place to start. So we'll do align items, which is vertical. What do I want to do? So we'll center it vertically. So everything inside of this div will be centered vertically. And we're gonna do a flex direction of column so that it all gets stacked. the page right now is a flex direction of row. So everything is kind of going a row. But now that we do the flex direction column, everything is made sure to be stacked on top of each other. Wonderful. The last thing we'll do is we'll target the double nested stuff so we can just see that it's like different. So we can add a background color just so we can see it better. You know, I do kind of like orange. So we'll target the double nested class, we'll add some orange, and we'll take a look at what just happened. Nothing yet. Let's see. Oh, nice. One sec. I added the flex direction here. You don't need to just because everything by default is in the column. But what you do want to do is add a justify content. And just to show that we can move things, we'll do flex end. And we'll quickly take a look at what that did. That pushed everything. So what we can see is if we take a look here. There is 100 pixels of padding. Here, here, and up top. But inside of it, the what is it? Everything's kind of like pushed to the side. You can see like this square is like the nested div. And then we'll just quickly add this so we can stay on time. For double nested, background color, and we can add some padding. I'll do 50 pixels just because that's what my thing has. And then we can do another flex so that everything inside of the double nested div is flex. And then we can make this a column, flex direction, and we'll add an align items and make that center. This is just a demo, but hopefully what this shows everyone is like flex is how you like move everything back and forth. And there's a lot of like nesting that happens because of the tree-like nature of CSS. And then we can also use the inspect to like take a look at what we've done so that we can see if it's what we want, and then we can also like change it. We will pick up with the Hoya Airlines. Today's Tuesday, so we'll do that Thursday in Rice. So I'll give you guys the HTML. I'll tell you guys what it should look like. You can like I'll give you some time to try and do it, and then we'll like walk through together how to actually make it and make something that looks good. Like this doesn't look good yet. This is just like a demo. But Thursday we'll make something that like looks pretty appealing. So yeah, thank you guys. This one's recorded. As with everything actually so far, you guys can head up and leave. But if anybody wants to see on YouTube, if you go to Hoya Developers, while y'all are packing up, I'll just show. You can go here. We have a playlist for the boot camp so far for fall 2025. And then everything's also in the Google Classroom. So there's two ways to find all of our recordings. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Of course. Same to you. Sick.